session on cloud security at the Cybersecurity Symposium for Smart Cities. My name is Nathan Chung. Today I am joined by Lee McKnight from Syracuse University and Scott Tulsey from Splunk. So Lee, why don't you get started?
Sure. We just find, wait, I have to go here. Oh, sorry, application window. Yeah, let me go here. And my slides. Why am I not getting it? Okay, it's I don't want to share my entire window. Okay, let's click there. It's not actually letting me share. Let's try that. Yeah, so Nathan, if you can just pull up my slides because it's not letting me get to them for whatever reason.
Okay. There it is. Okay, I have it. Let's go. Sorry, everyone, technical difficulties. Okay, and let us go.
Okay, very good. I'll start us off talking about smart city cloud security, emphasizing how by design we can all do better. Can you move to the next slide? So while talking about smart cities and cloud and architecture can sound very complicated, it's not really that complicated. That's what we're going to argue here. Three key words: secure, cloud, architecture. Everybody can remember those three words. And actually every city manager, every mayor, every school principal or teacher can start applying secure cloud architecture. Next. So what we've been working on here at Syracuse University and with the city of Syracuse and with corporate partners like our friend Scott and many others at different companies in the cloud space, we all know about different levels of risk, right, and concern. So if we all just started, keep remembering three colors, red, yellow, and green, and we started applying them to our own data, to our own systems. For person identifiable information is red data. That's the most sensitive. Yellow, medium sensitivity. Green, you actually want people to access all that information. You want help. You want to share that with the community and get all kinds of free labor from students and others to help organize and manipulate and put it up in shiny Splunk dashboards, right? So there's different ways. If we start thinking about organizing and structuring our information, any city manager now doesn't need to become a complete cloud expert or architect, but you can start organizing your data and get the benefits of sharing data openly with Open Civic Data while still protecting key information. Next slide. For example, in the city of Syracuse, we developed this secure cloud architecture framework under the auspices of the GCTC Cybersecurity Privacy Advisory Committee and a secure cloud architecture action cluster, working with all those kinds of companies and city officials, and applied this kind of decision matrix, saying, with the real life example, saying, okay, the city put in a smart streetlight network. What are the security risks? I say, well, you know what? Brighter lights, probably not too many, but if they start using those streetlight network for a lot of other applications, there could be some security issues or privacy issues. For catch basin, so it rains a lot up here in Syracuse when it's not snowing, and so the catch basins get plugged up. Right now, old school, if they're plugged up, they plug up and somebody has to complain about it to get it fixed. But you could put in a very cheap sensor to have it tell the city, unplug me here, and that could help with water flow and drainage. Water metering, It's everybody already has. There's a meter on the water, but if you develop a smart city IoT meter, the city officials could be getting real-time reads of like Nathan's water use. So we would know exactly when Nathan was taking a shower and when he was running the washing machine and some other things, which, you know what, I think most city officials don't want to really know these things. But if you don't actually design it in properly, you would have that information in city and public officials or private companies. There could be all kinds of misuse. Okay, so we get on to facial recognition and machine learning and AI, where we don't have time to go into all the controversies and issues around those technologies, but that's one that, you know what, before that goes live in any city, there's going to be some concern and some review of what it means. So just applying, but for all kinds of data, different information systems, smart city systems, any city data, you could start applying this red, yellow, green data classification scheme tomorrow and already start improving it, because what's important about the red? If it's red, you better back it up, because it could also be your transaction systems. It could be financial records. It could be something, but that's the information the ransomware cyber hackers are going for, because they know if they grab that and they shut you down, and you have to pay a ransom to get it back. There's so many other kinds of risks around that. So next slide. So of course, I argued it's not so complicated. There are more things to be worrying about, and applying the new information resource toolkit for cities and communities that's on this website, smartsocieties.org. This is just brand new. It's still in evolution, but this community, the 27 people that are on this Zoom session, there's the session right now, you all could be helping protect smart cities and communities, not just with this architecture, but in many, many different ways. There's all kinds of different tools that could be applied that you could start sharing or promoting in different ways. So I'll shut up now and turn it to Scott to take it forward. But in addition to this community, there's all kinds of federal resources too, which back all of this work up, which are also referenced below. Thanks very much.
Yep. Thank you, Scott.
And Nathan, if you'll do the same, go ahead and show the slides. I think that's simpler for all of us if one driver is involved.
Definitely. Give me a second. So while we're waiting, a quick question, Lee, what motivated you to create that framework? It looks amazing.
Well, we were, again, it's this public-private partnership working with federal agencies and city officials and Land Jensen and others, where I was being sort of asked to help with this whole effort. And I was hearing, actually, one of the expressions I use is like whack-a-mole cybersecurity. So people like Scott back in his day job in the federal government, or people that are doing cybersecurity full-time, or people like you, Nathan, that are trying to help many different companies. You know what? It's an unending. There's so many problems. There's so many ways in. There's so many vulnerabilities. It's endless. There's so many patches. It just feels like so. It also feels like you're running on a treadmill, right? You're never getting ahead. So I said, if we all step back and put it in upfront in architecture, we could kind of like Cloudflare, if you're familiar with that. Yeah. So let's Cloudflare cities and make them more self-protecting and more organized and more backed up in a way where the information is by being put into a cloud, but in a way with some level of different security gradients, because cities maybe don't use the cloud now because of budget limits or lack of knowledge limits. But if they can focus in on saying, because if you talk about every single bit of data that the city has, it can overwhelm the mayor, can overwhelm their IT director. But if it's saying, focus on the data that's going to shut you down in a ransomware attack, protect that, back it up to the cloud, make sure that's professionally managed. And everything else, yeah, we can still try to do the best we can. But that was kind of the insight. So I'll shut up there and turn to Scott.
Okay, let's go. Okay, next we have Scott Tosley from Splunk. Okay, let's go. All right. Take it away, Scott.
Sounds good. Yep. Scott Tousley with Splunk. I was an Army engineer officer for a number of years, worked in some startups and had a great time building a company from the ground up. Joined DHS as a civil servant, which is actually where I met Lee and a number of other folks, and worked with LAN and worked with Sakwu a number of years ago, and joined Splunk not quite 2 years ago and having a blast at it. Cloud is a big deal to Splunk. That's really what our business is increasingly based on. So I feel like some of this insight is probably useful. If you go to the next one then, Nathan. And the lawyers make me show this since Splunk is a public company, obviously. Next slide. In a single slide, Splunk takes any kind of machine data, puts it all together, and shows it for action and operations and changes and outcomes, whether it's security, whether it's operations, whether it's different IoT and innovation devices, stuff like that. We have our own cloud system. We use AWS. We use Google Cloud Platform. We are about to use Microsoft Azure. We'll work with anybody's systems. And so us as a company working with all of our customers, the cloud world is extremely important to everything that we do. Next slide, please.
Uh-oh.
There we go. This is sort of the current what's going on in Splunk as we speak, and it's interesting to see that cloud is one of the huge things on here. Obviously, we are helping all manner of our 20,000 or so customers deal with the heavy remote environment that everybody's involved with. We are still innovating and challenging things. You'll see a lot of that discussed. If anybody who's interested can register free and attend our users conference virtually next week. But it's interesting. This is an immediate, just from a month ago slide. The one I showed a moment ago was 3 years ago. But again, cloud is a big part of all that and provides the insight that I have. Next slide, please. And then this is the one slide that I really wanted to speak to. The level and the scale and the reach and the nature and the elements of technology change isn't going away. It's still happening. And that's a big challenge for a real CISO or CIO somewhere, because in essence, the technology is changing faster than you can actually keep up with it. And that's one of the problems that I'll come back to around the word quality. At the same time, you are seeing lots of usually helpful, sometimes a bit overbearing, regulatory and compliance guidance that is also growing massively. There was a comment I heard in the overall session an hour ago here about, yeah, there are privacy frameworks getting implemented alongside security frameworks. And if you Venn diagram the two, they're about 20 or 30% overlapped, and yet they're different. There's all manner of IoT frameworks. NIST does all sorts of framework efforts. You see the CMMC world in the Department of Defense. You see all sorts of things. The technology is changing massively, but so is all manner of instructions telling you how to do things. And some of that is helpful, and some of that just swamps everybody, I think, to be honest. Along with the tech value, the business value is massively still growing. And I think the fact that we're dealing with the COVID environment and the partial, inconsistent, depends on where you are, slowdown of economic activity in some areas and how others are picking up, that's actually going to drive a lot of the growing business value in stuff like this going forward. We see it at Splunk. It's in the middle of everything we do within our company and everything that is in our discussions with our partners and our customers and everybody that we serve. And so even if you're a CIO and a CISO that you would like to slow down the pace of technology change you're wrestling with around all things cloud, you almost can't, because you're being asked to generate more business value, whether you're in a private sector role or in a nonprofit or in a government sector role, because business value is real and has those terms everywhere. As these changes come about, as more people go to cloud, as more people go into heavily virtualization, as more people go into hybrid operations of all different kinds, the threats are going to follow you there. You will see them in reconnaissance mode, and you will see attacks grow as people get comfortable and figure out where they want to go. The Willie Sutton quote, why did he rob banks back in the day in the Depression years, 80 years ago? Well, that's where the money is. And if business value and if ransomware targets are in the cloud, that's where the threats will come find you. So the tech will get stronger and better and more capable, but you're going to deal with the same level, the same proportion of risks and threats and management of this challenge that a CIO or a CISO has. And then the last thing is the smart city community world is even harder than a simple, quote unquote, enterprise, because you're dealing necessarily across boundary lines, one county into another, the city into a county, enterprises, private enterprises inside of a public area and sector inside of a city. And that's one of our biggest challenges, is how to deal with cloud security, cloud operations, all of these things that are so powerful and capable technically, and so powerful in a business and a value sense, but our country still operates off of a heavily distributed, federated system where there's lots of government involved. And that's necessary, but it also adds a significant degree of friction and challenge for all of us from a smart city and community perspective. And so at the end of the day, the single biggest word I would leave with everybody is this is a problem of quality. You can define it a little differently depending upon your role and where you sit. There was a book published some years ago out of some MIT research called The Machine That Changed the World. And the machine, the title of the book, talked about the Japanese lean manufacturing and quality techniques that allowed the Japanese automobile companies to grow so massively and so successfully and pretty much eat Detroit's lunch for quite a while and force a degree of quality change into the Detroit automotive world that had not been there when I was a kid growing up and learning to drive cars back in the 70s. And if you read The Machine That Changed the World and you read the first third, the setup, everything in there they talk about, the problems in Detroit, were problems in quality. And every bit of that description is completely applicable to lots of the IT world, especially looking back over the recent decades. And so all of us are dealing with, at its core, a problem of quality, how to do a few things well, how to be adaptive, how to constantly improve things. And this leads you with a planning problem, an architecture problem, a leadership problem, all to keep the quality of what you're doing high, to do as best you can in a smart city and community space. And I think I'll leave it there, and Nathan, turn it back over to you.
Yes, thanks, Scott. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Okay, thanks, Scott. That was amazing. I totally agree. I think one question that would come to mind is some of the more, thanks to COVID, there's been a huge rush to cloud security. Many companies throughout the world see the cloud as their savior, but at the same time, the security is falling behind. And some of the latest attacks and threats against the cloud are around identity. So question for Scott, what can security do to address identity threats?
Some of the tech is helpful. Some of the quality and old systems and procedural issues for handling identity when somebody was on site, or you start having a cloud system that is part of the workforce but not the bulk of it. All those things are still in play. You still use those sorts of things. There's nothing magically different. It's just a larger challenge, increasingly in a zero trust world and architecture where you've got to really handle and deal with the identity thing in a systemic and, again, a high quality sort of way. So I think it's just a deeper part of the swimming pool than what it was just a few years ago. And it'll continue to be a challenge and something that a CIO and a CISO are going to have to pay attention to as one of the main layers that they look at with their organization and their operations.
Yep, totally agree. And one question for Lee. So your framework that you created last year, that looks incredible. How would what message would you have for the mayors of the large city, like say Shanghai or Tokyo or South Korea, or Seoul, South Korea, if they start to wonder how can they take that framework and implement that at scale at such a large city?
Sure. So, well, I'll preface just by the coincidence that I worked in the center where James Womack, one of the authors of The Machine That Changed the World, worked back when I was a doctoral student, postdoc researcher at MIT. And I still teach a summer school course for the last 20 years at MIT on innovation and everything that can go wrong, where people from that Machine That Changed the World group still lecture. But I won't do any more advertising for next June. Hopefully we can actually do that course again. So back to this, Secure was introduced in the June 2019 at the big Smart City and community symposium in Washington, which I admit I was kind of shocked that people like Scott, decades of veterans in land and city government officials, were letting me like rush this thing out with nobody had hardly any seen it before we were debuting it on the stage there. But look, now the need for a regional cloud architecture in a COVID-19, and I think quoting Scott again, mostly cloud, always remote. How could you do that without some common frameworks? It's really, really hard, right? So we've been presenting this to base commanders and the military, to city mayors, to companies, to counties, to my own university, where we're starting to eat our own dog food, so to speak, and start adopting this for internal practices. So essentially, from the early on, you say if you really, all those layers of complexity that Scott and are there, they don't go magically away, but at least from this kind of vetting and testing and feedback process, we find it helpful. Like everybody can understand red, yellow, and green, right? Everybody knows a stoplight. Stoplight means, so what red means? So red means something. Now, of course, applying this more widely. So this means it takes this out of, it's not just the CISO's responsibility. It's something the mayor can ask every city department or manager to say, you start thinking about this too, because somebody could want to steal your data. And if we're not thinking about it, you're gonna, like the school bus, what shut down one of the ransomware attacks? They locked up the school bus scheduling software. So the schools were shut down on the open, I forget which city this was that got locked down, couldn't open because of a ransomware attack that took the school bus schedule. Well, you wouldn't normally think about that as a prime target, right? But if you're a ransomware attacker trying to mess with the city, not letting the schools open because the buses can't move. All right, so anyway, the point is having something that simple. Now we get to the harder part. What do you do now with that red data? That's where the CISO has to be responsible, work with some select vendors, make sure the footnotes and the references in the back of my deck saying, here's NSA's 4 things that mess up most often. And number 1 is misconfiguration. So you got to make sure you're not messing it up, getting it into or out of the cloud, or none of this matters, which is what Scott would probably agree with. And I see Scott, turn to Scott.
Nathan, I also want to try and answer the question that Greg Gibson put in the chat window. I learned a principle as a military guy long, long ago. It turns out that some actually have a pair of individuals do the defense and not a single individual. And the reason is that there is an interlocking value in cross connection. And I bring that up because I think what has to be done in the cloud world, because it is dynamic, it's shifting, there's all sorts of technical elements and possibilities, is you've got to think of sort of a 2080 principle where you put this work in, you do what you're going to do, you put the priorities in place and work on it, but you spend at least a little bit of your time finding a teammate or a partner to look over your shoulder and give you some ideas about what you haven't thought of or what priorities you might have overlooked as a priority. And you spend a bit of time doing the same thing, helping them look at their cloud environment. And having a little bit of help check and a little bit of teammate assistance in some fashion or form, I think ends up with a greater strength outcome for the whole than if we all go off and do whack-a-mole individually in our cloud, in our system. You see the same thing in a business sense where most major organizations will bring in a couple of cloud providers and diversify a little bit and allow for some flexibility. And so that A plus a little bit of B principle, defending, resourcing, all that sort of stuff, I think that's one of the best ways to try and keep driving a higher and higher degree of quality in the cloud elements that you've got going on in your particular organization.
Totally agree. Okay, I don't see too many questions in the chat, but question for you, Scott. Another question would be, as smart cities are getting more and more attacks, ransomware and the like, how can DHS and the governments be partners with smart cities to help them to address these security threats?
I think DHS and CISA try and do a lot of things, and some of it's quite good, but the scale of the problem is far too big for them to reach out directly, and they can't manage it in a linear sense. And sometimes I think they may occasionally forget bits of that. I think the challenge is for DHS to encourage the indirect growth, the intangible growth of lateral communications, community to community. There's got to be a zero fault element of all this. If you look at the hospital world going back decades, there's always been a Monday morning, how did surgeries go last week? What mistakes were made? Not run by the lawyers to fire people, run by learning systems to make sure, because everybody's going to make some degree of mistakes, no matter what the area involved is. And so even in the cloud world, in these deployments we're talking about, you've got to have a system to be able to learn. And some of that is from other counterparts around you. Some of it's in the 2080 idea that brought up individually. And I think that's the way you improve the quality and the outcomes of what people are wrestling with.
Okay.
Done
And
for time, I think.
yep, we're just about out of time. So in closing, Bill Gates once said, I believe that if you show people the problems and you show them the solutions, they will be moved to act. Also, I would like to send a big thanks to Lan Jensen and all the wonderful speakers and volunteers who made this incredible event possible. Thank you. And especially thank you to Lee and Scott for being here. Incredible
Thank you.
insights.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank
Have
you.
a great day.